Aid is life-saving, and it's seriously underutilized by many players out there. If you're looking for a long-term buff that's useful 100% of the time and an in-a-pinch healing spell all wrapped into one, look no further than Aid. For starters, here's a spell description and the classes you can cast it. Now I'll cover a few tips for using this second level spell effectively. My first use of Aid isn't the one most people think of when they first read the spell, and that's to save an ally or three who's been downed. While most players look at Aid as a long-term hit point buff, one of the most potent applications of Aid is actually putting a fallen ally back on their feet. And yes, Aid can bring up a downed creature. As Jeremy Crawford points out, if you have even one hit point, you don't have to worry about being stabilized anymore. You're back on your feet. Since Aid brings your current hit points from 0 to not 0, it can effectively heal a creature who's been brought down to 0 hit points. This can be extra impactful if multiple allies are down simultaneously, as Aid becomes a poor man's healing word at this point. My next tip for Aid is to take advantage of the 8-hour duration and no concentration requirement. When you do want to use Aid as a long-term buff, remember to take advantage of your extra health pool by taking short rest and spending those hit dice to top yourself off. It might make the difference between being taken down and staying on your feet to finish the next fight. Or eat some good berries to get that buffed up maximum hit point pool back to full. The point is, every time you top up your aided hit point pool, you're effectively multiplying the value of the single spell slot. This is probably obvious, but if you want to use Aid as a buff, you shouldn't waste your time casting it in combat. Instead, cast it before your party takes off for the day, so you have your action ready for the first round of combat. Bonus tip, elves can wait to rest until the final 4 hours, buff their party with Aid, then transfer 4 hours to get their spell slot back. That's a free, albeit half duration, Aid spell for your party. And this gets even more extreme if your DM allows you to rest cast it. If you have any second level or higher spell slots left at the end of an adventuring day, you can use the highest available one to cast Aid during the last moments of a long rest. The spell slot you spent will immediately come back once you've completed the long rest. Note that while rest casting is allowed, rules as written, some DMs find it a cheesy tactic and disallow it at their table. Be sure to talk to your DM to see how they plan on ruling it before making this a staple of your character build. Also, be advised that even if this trick is allowed at your table, you'll still need to save a spell slot until the end of your adventuring day to pull it off. My next piece of advice for Aid is to stack it with temporary hit points. Aid increases a target's current hit points and maximum hit points, and this hit point increase is not the same as temporary hit points. The implication of this is that Aid does stack with temporary hit points, whereas temporary hit points don't stack with themselves. This opens up the door to stack Aid with powerful temporary hit point spells and effects, the most potent of which is the Inspiring Leader feat. With both Aid and Inspiring Leader, you can easily pad your party's squishiest members with plus 30 to 50% extra hit points at the start of each day. Other temporary hit point features to stack with Aid include Glamour Bard's Mantle of Inspiration, Storm Herald Barbarian's Tundra Storm Aura, and Fiend Warlock's Dark One's Blessing. As for spells, there's False Life, Heroism, and Armor of Agathis. Another thing to consider with Aid is how to spread it wisely. With only 3 targets, you always need to ask yourself where the bonus hit points are most needed in your party. The answer isn't always the person with the lowest hit points. Sometimes it's better to make your tanks extra beefy, while other times it's all about keeping your backline safe. Or you might want to beef up a Find Familiar to keep it safe or protect a valuable but unwarrior-like NPC you're escorting. This decision depends on more than just your party composition. Consider the tactics of the enemies you're likely to encounter as well. Some foes in battlegrounds are easy to bottleneck into fighting your group's tanks, while others are more chaotic, and situations might call for padding the hit point pool of your squishiest members. With an 8-hour duration, you should also think about who will get the most long-term mileage out of Aid, what with short rest healing and the like. My final tip for Aid is in the same vein, and that's to upcast it wisely. Aid scales quite nicely when upcast. A 4th level Aid provides 45 total hit points for your party, and potentially a 45 hit point heal if used in combat. At 6th level, that beats out the equally leveled heal spell by 5 total healing, albeit spread out and situationally dependent. It's especially useful to upcast it if your DM allows for rest casting. At the end of the day, 3 members of your party are guaranteed at least 5 hit points the next day, possibly more if you've been conservative with your resources. Even if your DM doesn't allow for rest casting, increasing the power of a day-long buff that's guaranteed to be useful also isn't a bad idea, especially when you have a good grasp of what spell slots you'll need for the rest of the adventuring day. Those are the most useful tips I can think of for making the most out of Aid. It's an excellent spell to constantly keep up on your party, and it can also serve as an in-combat heal depending on your playstyle and other available spells. Its ability to stack with temporary hit points, potential for upcasting, and possibility to be rest cast are all just icing on the cake of a buff that stays good for an entire campaign. I'd also love to hear your thoughts on Aid and stories about how you used it effectively in your own D&D games. But for now, let's turn to the one rule that comes up around the Aid spell frequently, and that's that Aid cannot stack with itself. As the player's handbook points out, the effects of the same spell cast multiple times don't combine. Instead, the most potent effect applies while their durations overlap. To be clear, this also goes for the creature's current hit points. So if you want to quote-unquote heal a downed creature with Aid, but that creature is already benefiting from Aid, then targeting them with an Aid spell of the same level or lower will do nothing. That being said, an upcast Aid will take priority over a lower leveled Aid spell, and can therefore quote-unquote heal a player. And Aid will still definitely stack with temporary hit points. Here are a few more details on Aid-specific rules that I didn't feel common enough to include details for in the video. Pause if you'd like to read about a few more edge case rules that might come up around Aid. I hope those tips for using Aid and rule reminders about how it works are helpful. Now let's answer the final question of the day. Is Aid a good spell? My answer is yes, Aid is a great spell. It's a solid buff to cast at the start of any adventuring day, and the fact that it stacks with temporary hit points allows for quite a nice extra layer of protection. Aid also shines in the niche of raising multiple downed allies, almost like a poor man's mass healing word, a 4th level spell, when you cast it in combat. And if you can rest cast in your game, then Aid becomes a no-brainer. It's basically a constant, resource-free boost to 50% or more of your party's hit points. Seeing as hit points are a resource that get used in basically 100% of D&D sessions, Aid will always benefit your party. You'll never feel like you wasted a spell slot on it. And with Aid's formidable scaling when upcast, it's a buff that remains relevant all the way into the late game of any campaign. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you found this guide on Aid helpful and can show your appreciation with a like and subscribe. It's a massive help for small YouTubers like me. If you have any stories about using Aid in your own Dungeons & Dragons game or questions about the spell's rules, please share them in the comments below. This is D&D Lounge wishing you the best of luck in your next spellcasting venture.